Have you lost your USB completely?
Seem to. Just pull the. Oh, I was going to pull this one out.
Oh, yeah. Should I put the USB back in?
Yeah. Well, we've got something.
Caps lock off. Caps lock on. NVDA menu. General settings. Top. Synthesizer dialog. Synthesizer colon. Compact plus device colon. Combo box left from left. Intel. Speakers left. Speakers left. Speakers left. USB audio colon. Left.
Got something working?
Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All good?
Yep. Okay, apologies, folks. What can go wrong will go wrong.
Recording is on.
It's intended for software menus navigated with arrow keys, but it's used very often on standard navigation. It adds verbosity there, nullifies screen readers' access to lists, and in fact with some screen reader browser combinations it can mess things up really badly. Oh, it's working. So you get the idea. It's saying menu item every time, which is completely unnecessary and unuseful. If I go to the top of the page and I try to go to the next list, there's no list. And that's because of this sticky note on there. It shouldn't be there, but lots of people do it. Role equals alert. This is another one that can be quite frustrating. There are three related attributes. ARIA live equals polite. ARIA live equals assertive, which, as the name suggests, is a bit more intrusive. And role equals alert. The alert role should really only be used if there's something really important, like you've missed out an important field, or there's something you really need to know about before you move on. I've come across on expanding and contracting menus, and it shouldn't be there. There's no need to have it saying alert every time the thing opens and closes. I've even come across it on occasions on empty divs, just in case, I suppose. The alert role. This is, I came across this one literally on a form, and I won't name the very major company who did this, but listen to what happens every time I type a character. Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny too. Yeah. Now so there I've written an invalid email address, and when I tab out of it, so there's love you. So there are ways of checking correctly, to see if someone's put in a valid email address or not. And I'm sure I've run over time. Sorry, Sarah. Given
That's all right. I'm giving you 3 minutes break.
All right, thank you. ARIA hidden. It's a very useful tool, but again, occasionally, just recently I've come across a couple of situations where people, I'm sure they intended to make materials accessible to the screen reader, but because they didn't read the spec properly, they made it inaccessible to screen readers. It hides the element from screen readers, and as I say, there are times, particularly if, say, you're doing a modal dialogue or something where you want to hide the rest of the screen, that's completely appropriate. Let's have a look at him. So you see it's jumped over that second paragraph completely because I've got aria hidden equals true on that second paragraph. Read instructions before use. We all say it's a good idea, but no one does it. Oh, I do, sometimes. So be sure you know what the aria attribute does before you use it. Test with a screen reader. That's a really good idea because that'll tell you, if it's working the way you want. Especially if you're using automated tools, and I suspect most of you web developers are, check that it's injecting aria appropriately because very often it doesn't. And that's because the people who wrote the tool didn't read the spec, and so the problem gets perpetuated. ARIA 1.1 specification, it's available at
https://www.w3.org/tr/y-aria-1.1/.
And finally, last year I had the privilege of attending an introduction to ARIA workshop run by Russ Weekly at the AliCam conference. And Russ has kindly made that material from that workshop available at
https://github.com/russmaxdesign/aria-workshop.
And that's really, really useful stuff because there's lots of wonderful information and exercises and all sorts. Thank you very much.
Help you unplug.
Right. I don't know what I did, but...
Yep. I'm just going to grab the original microphone.
You want that? Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay, there we go. Again. So when I sent out the acceptance emails for the presentations and I said, send your slides in, and Andrew comes back to me and he says, I'm going to be the problem child again. I want to use my own tech. I'm like, okay. So it's very cool. He's got a very complex tech setup, but occasionally it does cause a few issues. I have to laugh at his demonstration of role equals alert when we're doing testing and we find certain things like that, and also other times where there's a lot more sort of screen reader text than what's on the screen. We call it killing the screen reader user with kindness. It's usually done with good intentions, but I think sometimes it is a little bit verbose. So we're going to swap over to my other computer in a sec, but I would like to introduce Jessica King. Jess is one of the founders of Abilio, which she will tell you a little bit about during her presentation. She is a accessibility activist, and today is going to talk to us about her brain squish.
I hope so. We'll find out, won't we? Hi, as Sarah said, I'm Jessica and I'm from Abilio. When the slide thing works, I promise, it's true.
The best laid plans.
Hey, there we go. Okay. So, at Abilio, we're all about making life accessible. We want everyone to experience all of the good things that life has to offer. And I've just broken it again. That's great. Nope. Scroll. Okay. Yep. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So I love tech. I love accessible tech. and I love marrying the two to create great experiences for people with disability. And I'm lucky enough to have witnessed the positive changes that technology has brought to the world. I've been a direct beneficiary of it. So I have a dodgy heart, means I get really tired and have limited energy. So being able to access lecture notes and academic databases online played a huge part in my ability to complete coursework and ultimately finish my uni degrees. Because everything was online, I didn't have to find energy I didn't have to get to uni, walk to the library, research, return home, and then write a 10,000 word essay. Now, if you hang around me enough, you'll hear me say over and over again that disability is diverse. You can't tell if someone is disabled just by looking at them. And the way that disability is experienced varies from person to person, even if they have the same disability. And this diversity is really important to remember when you start thinking about digital accessibility. Digital accessibility encompasses more than just ensuring screen readers or captions for images and video, although that is super important and you should be doing it already. There are other barriers to digital accessibility that you might not have considered. And one of those is going to be my focus tonight, and that's cognitive fatigue. So as a bit of background, 18 months ago, I got an infection in my brain, which resulted in brain damage, several months in hospital, and I was surrounded by machines and beautiful hospital gowns. I had to relearn how to do everything. It was just like being a toddler. While I learned how to walk and talk, I discovered
You mean I mean the other thing?
Are we good now? Is it broken? No, I think we're good. Okay. Okay, all right. So rehash, got really sick, brain got squashed. Had to learn how to work and talk, but I discovered that I now had really bad cognitive fatigue. And that's completely changed everything from how I plan day-to-day activities to how I work. Now, slowly, I've been working on improving my concentration. So this time last year, I could work for 3 minutes, and that's it, and then I had to stop. Today, I can work for 25 minutes at a time, and I only need a 10-minute break between work sessions. It was really frustrating at first, but I realized that with good planning, I could manage my fatigue and still be productive. I just had to approach things differently. But cognitive fatigue is not just related to brain injury or trauma. If you hang around with people with chronic illness enough, you'll hear them referring to it as brain fog. And it can include symptoms like poor memory, poor concentration, the inability to process or understand basic information. The symptoms experienced on any given day or even time of day are not predictable. At its worst, every single task is enormous. It takes much, much longer to complete anything if you manage to complete it at all. So a recent experience I had with an online form is a great example of how this works. Poor accessibility, bad user experience, and bad design combined to make a nightmare for me. So not long ago, my landlord decided it was time to renovate, and I found myself looking for a place to live. And I knew this was going to be a stressful thing, but what I found to be more stressful than attending endless open houses was actually the application process itself. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, the majority of real estate agents force prospective tenants to apply using online forms. The idea is that it simplifies and streamlines the application process for agents and for tenants. Basically, it's a one form for everything: payslips, ID, DNA. And this sounds ideal. I did not discover that. These forms didn't allow me to manage my fatigue. I wasn't sure what information they require, so I couldn't plan out my time. Added to this, there's a lot of pressure because if you don't get that form in by 9 a.m. the next day, the likelihood is that you won't get that house. So the first problem I encountered was just no clear information. At various points by filling out the form, I needed to stop what I was doing, go away, dig through some paperwork to find something like my dog's microchip number, return, and refocus. I had no option to skip and then fill all this extra stuff in at the end. Littered throughout the form were fields that required dates, like date of birth or length of time at current house. And the way that you input these dates represented no other calendar I have ever encountered, ever. I couldn't type in a date. I had to select a decade. Then a year in that decade. Then a month of that year. And then a day in that month. Each step took 1 minute to perform. That's 4 minutes per date. It used so much browser memory that it almost crashed at each step. And I had to provide around 10 different dates. That's 40 minutes of precious energy spent on dates. And if I made a mistake, I had to start from scratch. I worked through this, becoming more and more tired. When my brain gets tired, I become agitated, less able to focus, and very stressed. As I clicked submit, the system recognized that the second person I'd put on the application, my husband, had completed a form of his own. It asked if I'd like to include his application with mine before I sent it to the agent. I clicked yes. So it collated the forms and sent them to the real estate agent, right? Nope. I was returned to the exact same form that I had just completed and instructed to fill it out once again. This time using my husband's information. I vomited. Literally. It was just too much for my brain. The cognitive overload was so bad that I couldn't complete the form. I was unable to do anything for the rest of the day, like stand straight or walk properly. So my husband took over for me, and in total the process took 3 hours. And I can't help but think, if he hadn't have been there, if I didn't have somebody to help me, I would have been excluded from accessing the housing market. Now, how is that fair? How can your ability to have a roof over your head depend on your capacity to fill in a form online? So in the end, I did get a house through an application that was sent to me as a PDF that I filled out on an iPad with an Apple Pencil. It was as easy as the other form should have been. And this is why it's important to think about accessibility as a function of usability and user experience. If you're a product manager and your user journeys aren't covering this before a single line of code is written or a single design has been drawn, then you need to change that. Poor accessibility has real-world consequences. It can remove the ability of a person to complete basic tasks, having to rely on a third party when they shouldn't have to. It's unnecessarily and entirely preventable. Good accessibility, on the other hand, might be life-changing, providing independence and opening up new opportunities. Creating an accessible solution has positive effects that reach beyond the disabled community. By taking accessibility and usability into account, right from the start, you can have positive outcomes across your business and customer base. So join me in my crusade. Give the same priority to ensuring that your customers have an accessible experience as much as they have a positive user experience, and help me make the world a little bit more accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. So I just wanted to take a minute actually to just briefly show you the new Web Accessibility Initiative website. So the Web Accessibility Initiative is part of the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and they're the guys that write all the standards. Often, you'll hear WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, quoted when you're talking about accessibility. Well, these guys are the guys that actually write all of those standards. But just in the last week or so, they've actually released a new website. I think anything that can go wrong is going to go wrong tonight. Okay, where was I? New Web Accessibility Initiative website. So has anyone visited the old Web Accessibility Initiative website? 15? No, maybe about 20 people. Who thought it was looking a bit tired, like it was done, say, 20 years ago? Yeah, pretty much everyone. So we all knew it was kind of looking a bit tired. It was terribly hard to navigate. I don't think anyone had looked at the information architecture for probably that 20 years. So they actually, the last probably a good year and a half actually, have been working on this brand new website, and it has just been released. So I wanted to bring to your attention to it because the Way website always had fantastic materials, but everyone just didn't want to go to it. So this is the website that you can see up on the screen. It has 6 top-level sections, accessibility fundamentals. So if I actually go into the accessibility fundamentals, that sort of gives you your introduction to accessibility. The perspective videos are particularly good, especially if you're trying to show people, I guess, some of the different ways you can address accessibility and the impacts. There's about a series of 10 that were actually released last year, I think, on Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And some actually great resources which are more text-based about how people with disability use the web. So that's a great section to start with. They've also got some planning and policy information. That's the next section. So planning and managing your accessibility. So this is sort of from the project management side of things or the organisational policy side of things. I know they're currently working on an updated business case, and they're doing awesome work on that. So that should be out. Actually, I won't say should be out because they're having a bit of trouble finding case studies, but I'd say within the next month or so, certainly. We then get to design and development. So we've got some introduction to tips to writing, tips for designing, and tips for developing. So if you're sort of starting out with any of those 3 roles or having people in your team start out, it's great to have a look at those. There's also a link off to the tutorials. If you haven't visited the tutorials, they sort of take you through step-by-step different topics. So things like carousels, although I'd actually rather people not use carousels for accessibility reasons, but that's a different thing. Page structure and navigation, they've got about 6 or 7, including forms as well. So they've got some great information in there. And also that's a bit more techie. So for any developers, it's got code samples in there. We then have the testing and evaluation section, so more getting on to how we review accessibility, particularly against the standards that the W3C puts out. If you're starting out in accessibility, Easy Checks is a fantastic way to start out testing your website. It takes some easy things that you can do yourself and check yourself on your website. So things like, is it keyboard navigable? Do I have the right page title? So as you can see up there with the tabs, we've got beautiful, meaningful page titles. If you're starting out with testing, that's an awesome way to start. It then has some more detailed information about evaluation tools, and also how you might do reporting on evaluation as well. teaching and advocacy. So in here, we've got a number of topics, making presentations accessible. So when we accept presenters for A11YBytes, we actually give them a little cheat sheet just talking about what you should do to make your presentations more accessible. And some of that content has come from this resource. There's also the before and after demo, which essentially shows good or bad practice, good practice examples. So they're also very powerful sometimes to be using. And then lastly, standards and guidelines. So this links off to all of the relevant standards for accessibility. So good old WCAG, as I said, ATAG, authoring tool accessibility guidelines for things like CMSs, anything essentially that's really creating a product. User agent accessibility guidelines. So these are the guidelines that like our web browsers and our screen readers are supposed to follow. And then good old way ARIA, which we heard from Andrew. So you can link off to that. And then a few other specifications as well. So I wanted to give them a plug. They've done an immense amount of work to get to this point. Interestingly, so I actually sit on the group, the Education and Outreach Working Group that does all this, and there's about one person that is full-time employed by the W3C to actually do this, and a lot of other things as well. Everything else is volunteer, so they've put an awesome amount of effort into it, and I wanted to share that with you and say, don't, go, oh no, I can't go to the WAY website or send people there, which is often what people have said in the past. Do go and have a look at it now that it has been refreshed. Okay, back to our presentations. Where am I? Next, I would like to introduce Joanna. Joanna is an experienced designer with demonstrated history in the banking sector. In addition to her freelance work, she has been working in UX and as a digital designer at Teachers Mutual Bank. And today she's going to talk about the road to accessibility, the road that she has taken with her organisation around accessibility.
Sorry, that took a little while to get on. Great. Thank you for having me. Firstly, I should probably provide a bit of a disclaimer. I'm not really an expert in accessibility, and I don't have a finished product or a big clear-cut success story. What I would like to do today is just really share my story about what we've done to get accessibility started in our organisation, and where we are at the moment and where we're hoping to get to. We've been chipping away at it, but we've still got quite a way to go. So just a little bit about our organisation. So we're one of Australia's largest mutual banks. We've got 193,000 members. These include Teachers Mutual Bank, Unibank and Firefighters Mutual Bank. Our core values are advocacy, passion and sustainability. We've been named one of the world's most ethical companies by Ethisphere for 5 years in a row. One of only 4 banks named worldwide and the only Australian company listed. We're a remote bank and we only have 8 branches, and some of these don't even handle cash. So it really means that we are in fact a digital business. Over the last few years, so since I started in 2016, the accessibility issues were pretty apparent straight away. My first attempt at communicating this, if I'm honest, wasn't very effective. I didn't really understand the complex nature of the business and or the culture really, and so I wasn't really able to sell the idea of setting an accessibility standard. We do have some really good business reasons for doing it though. The obvious ones are legal compliance and removing barriers to conversion. However, these have really been trumped by the fact that we're a niche business and we actually have quite a lot of restrictions on membership in accordance with mutual regulation. We actually can't afford to further restrict our funnel because it's already limited, especially by, say, around 20%, which is the sort of estimated number of people with disabilities in Australia. I think a lot of businesses are probably in a similar position. And one organisation, Able Gamers, it's an advocacy for gamers in the US, but they actually estimate that there's something like 33 million gamers who have a disability of some sort, which is a massive market. And so they've actually been using that to advocate for accessible games. Some of the challenges that we face as an organisation are third-party products. So we use third-party products for our core banking functionality, our online banking, and some of our key digital functionality. Some of the issues with this software is due to legacy code, but also just a lack of consideration in the design of the software. And usually by the time we see it, it's really expensive and time-consuming for us to get the issues corrected. Another problem that we have is that once I actually started talking to people about accessibility in the organisation is that there's a real sort of compliance mindset around it. And so it was really difficult for people to get past the idea that this was really just a box to tick and that it wasn't actually about people. The visual branding for our primary brand was developed in 2012, and this was done in isolation of any sort of digital consideration. So it's been really challenging as far as trying to implement it correctly from a digital perspective, and when I arrived it had been done incorrectly. So we've had a multitude of issues around low colour contrast, as well as also just an inappropriate font for online. It has a lot of readability issues. It's got really small spacing. So I was very fortunate in a lot of the support that I had with the managers within my department. So my department is digital services and we sit underneath sales and marketing. Once I actually started sharing the argument for accessibility and having an accessibility standard within our organisation, my managers within my department were pretty quick to pick it up and actually pushed upwards to senior management, and we were able to sort of achieve some level of senior management buy-in. And when I say that, it was very much like, yeah, that's a great idea, we'll go ahead and implement it. However, as I mentioned, the vendor relationships are actually held at the executive level, so it was very difficult for us to also push upwards with a sort of a push upwards for accessibility requirements. As I mentioned earlier about the compliance mindset, it really did ignore the fact, people were ignoring the fact that this was about 20% of the population. And, you know, it's limiting human beings' access to products, services and content. And so this whole issue is really about people, and it's about sort of giving everyone an equal platform to operate in the world. A lot of the identified accessibility issues were also sort of basic usability issues, such as, you know, core readability when it comes to color contrast or even font size. So to combat this, we took an approach to humanize the issue. And at first we were just looking at feedback from users, and we were able to identify multiple issues around accessibility, again, ranging from low color contrast to not supporting screen readers. We were also able to observe some members and how they were actually using particular devices to assist them. Over the last couple of years, the organisation has really started a process of digital transformation, and this really worked in our favour. Though my department formalised development sprints, and we've also moved away from purely project-motivated releases. And this paved the way for us to take a more sort of iterative approach with the accessibility issues that we were able to actually action. So moving on from that, so in order to actually habitualise this change, we've sort of started setting up design-led sprints with our internet banking platform. And this is really helping us to build consultation and testing into the development workflow. And it really helps us to maintain a base level of accessibility so that we don't actually go backwards. At a higher level, our department is taking on a more sort of consultative role, and managers are working really hard to actually get in at the early phase of work being started so that we can actually have more of a say in ensuring that that accessibility level standard gets maintained. In communicating the broader positive impact, it's really important that we keep stressing that what we're doing for, at an accessibility level is actually helping to continue improving usability and user experience as well down the road. We've created and also shared quite a number of tools around our organisation. So this includes just setting up things like correct ways to implement colour, so providing guides to the content creators, developers, other designers throughout the organisation, as well as just sharing existing tools that are out there, such as I really like Funkify, which is a disability simulator, and also having basic colour contrast tools such as WebAIM's colour contrast tool. Also tracking and reporting progress. So this has been really useful in actually keeping it a lot more visible, the changes that we've been working on, and just raising greater awareness around the organisation as well. Okay, so the road ahead, what we're really hoping to focus on is improving that primary visual brand for Teachers Mutual Bank. And we'll continue working with vendors to increase the accessibility so that they're actually delivering accessible products from their end. I'd really like to see an organisational policy set up around broader accessibility for our organisation as well. And also to continue working with fostering open communication channels and with our members and communities as well. So key things that I've learnt during this process is to definitely be an advocate, know your organisation, especially around communication channels. Be persistent because it is can be a long road, and humanise the issue, and also be ready for opportunities because change will happen, and when it does, it's usually more open to other change as well. Great, thank you.
That's awesome, Joanna. Thank you. There are a lot of organisations that are on this journey right now, certainly in increasing, I guess, their accessibility that they build into their products, but also moving to, I guess, accessibility as business as usual. It's no longer an added extra or something that you tack on or something that you take off, which also happens. Timelines are too short, we've got to axe that. When it becomes integrated, then it's no longer something extra. So thank you for sharing that. As it turns out, we're actually going to be announcing the dates for Ali Camp, which is the conference later on. But Joanna mentioned Able Gamers, and we actually have the founder of Able Gamers, Mark Barlett, actually coming out as one of our keynote speakers. So perfect timing that you mentioned that. So next up we have Jack LaRussell. So Jack is a design technologist. What that means is he's part designer and part front-end developer, although these days he says he's actually opening more code blocks than he is working with design files. He became focused on accessibility through his work in design systems, and he's a huge Firefox fanboy, and actually that's what he's going to show us today. Andrew's obviously a Firefox fanboy as well. He's going to show us Firefox and a particular add-on that they have released to help with accessibility.
Hi, everyone. Yep. Okay, cool. Before I start, I'd just like to know, I wasn't really sure what audience I was talking to. And it does much the same thing. Same rule set, yeah. And yeah, that's why. That's why it does much the same thing. Okay, so yeah, that's just my slide to remind me to say these tools are great. I'm not saying there's better tools available now. But why would we want a new tool? What do these tools not cover? And to do that, I've got to kind of like rewind, and we're going to talk about like how does assistive technology like a screen reader or a braille display actually construct an interface for a user. And it's with a core concept is programmatically expressed semantics, which sounds really complicated, but I hope it's not. So amazingly, this is verbatim from a Google Developer Advocate website, and I think the Google Developer Advocate is in the room. So, hi. Okay. Well, so when you're coding and you're writing HTML, every element has some non-visual metadata that goes along with it. So you might think of a button as a button, a visual button. but it's also got this other data that comes along with it when it's in the document. So it's got a role, a name, a value, and a state, and all of these things kind of contribute to how that element is expressed in a bunch of different situations. So if we were to think about, like, if your job didn't include building a visual interface and you were just trying to communicate to people through screen readers, you'd probably you'd think about it a lot more like a flow diagram, like what's in this picture. You might have groups, and you might have things within those groupings, and you'd need to say for each item, like a radio button, it would need to have a name, round trip, state, selected, and so on. And so, like, when you see code like this, and to a sighted user, this is an input with a name label, and you go, yeah, that label is for that input. But when that is taken out of a visual context and it's picked up and it's moved somewhere else, that association is lost unless it is programmatically expressed, the association between the things. And it's actually really easy to do. So with that label, all we had to do was add a for attribute, and then now, no matter where that form element is picked up and moved around, if it's a screen reader context, it's going to be associated with that input. So the browser takes the DOM tree, or the code you write, which is then transformed into the DOM tree, and it's modified into a form that's useful to assistive technology, and then a screen reader or whatever assistive technology uses that tree to structure its interface. Okay, so that was like a lot of information, and I know only half of you are developers. But I guess you can understand that if you're not a user of assistive technology yourself, there's a risk of this feeling kind of abstract, perhaps. And I think a lot of people have to, as the last speaker said, they have to have that moment where it is humanized for them, and they go, oh, this is something I really care about. But what if there was like another way, like a discoverable way for developers to explore the accessibility tree and see what it's like for a screen reader, what the screen reader sees? And that takes me to my little demo. So I have a form here, and it's a really simple, it's a box on a screen with two elements here. And I'm using Firefox Developer Edition as my browser. So if I open the DevTools, the first thing I want to do, if I want to enable the accessibility inspector that I'm showing off, is to go into this, what's this called? It's a Customized Developer Tools, and go into the settings and tick this accessibility checkbox, which brings this panel to the forefront, which is the thing that I'm demoing. So let's turn it on and let's see what's going on here. What we get back is actually what a screen reader sees. So it's that accessibility tree that I talked about before. So we're not seeing anything visual on the screen. We're seeing what a screen reader gets as those semantics. And this is actually a bad form because in my haste, I forgot to do some things. So I can see that even though there's two form fields here, two text inputs, only one of them has the label associated with the entry. So this input, the name of it is e.g. Aya Stark, which is the placeholder, and that's not actually what I want. So if I hop into my my DOM inspector over here, which is probably a bit small, I'm going to bump that, sorry. I can actually go over and I can do exactly what I said before, which is to add a for attribute. And now here's a little thing that a trick for young players. right now, you've got to turn off at least in my build or tonight, I had to turn off the accessibility features, turn it back on, to see that difference. So now I've got a label for that form, called name. And yeah, so essentially I've done what I did before in that demo where I've associated that, programmatically in a way that, it can be used in multiple contexts, not just a visual context. And I have some other little things I was going to fix, but I mostly just want you to have a look here and see that there's a whole bunch of, if we go back here, there's all sorts of things going on. A lot of this is code specific, and a lot of it has some styles applied. But the accessibility tree is just the content. And that's what's so exciting about this new tool. You get to see that content expressed semantically. All right, so that's the demo. I'm so excited about this, and I will say that Chrome has something similar. It does have a little accessibility panel. It's not as big, and I don't. It's not. It's smaller, and it's not as easy to explore the tree. And I actually, personally, as someone who points and clicks with a mouse, I actually keep bouncing out of it. So anyway, I'm really excited about these new tools. One of the reasons is discoverability. So it's actually built in as a first-class citizen, or it's a first-class concern in this tool suite. So it encourages exploration of the accessibility tree and therefore understanding. So as a developer, so many of us learn by lifting the hood and fiddling with what's under there, and kind of learning by seeing what other people are doing. But what's really cool is you can see what a screen reader sees right there while you're working, flipping between and seeing how your changes impact that, which can be more practical than typing something and then listening to a screen reader and then typing something if you're not used to using a screen reader. So it's really cool. The other thing is it doesn't actually fight any of the other tools in that toolkit that I expressed earlier. They both work, they all work hand in hand, and they all help you. So that's really cool. Also, the accessibility inspector is also accessible. And basically, can you use it? Yes, in Firefox Nightly. Yes, in Firefox Developer Edition. Yes, in the beta. But if you're just plain old Firefox, you're going to have to wait until the 26th of June until Firefox 61 is released. But you can play with it right now, as I showed. Really quickly, we're looking for a product manager where I work. Hit me up if you're looking for a new challenge. You don't even know where I work, but we'll talk about it later. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jack. You took actually what is quite a technical concept and, delivered it really, really well. So well done on that. We are moving into our last presenter. So I'd like to introduce Giselle, who will be coming up in a sec. Giselle is an experienced and passionate advocate for bringing about legal and other systemic reforms to create an inclusive digital society. After many years of attempting to enact change by lodging complaints through the Australian Human Rights Commission, and also approaching organisations directly, she founded the Digital Gap Initiative. The initiative was originated on a dark and stormy night over a cup of rooibos tea and many phone calls with her friend Lee. Giselle is keen to network with anyone who shares her vision and has experienced the digital gap and wants to do something about it. So Tartanian has a reputation at A11YBytes events and Alley Camp. He is known to eat the pizza. He also got my colleague Adam's charger cable for his laptop. Thankfully, it wasn't plugged in. By the time we realised it was in 8 parts. So he's a little bit naughty. And I am going to mind him for the next 10 minutes, so hopefully he'll be good for me.
Thank you.
I'm not even sure SIT's going to work.
Thank you. Good evening. NDIS, I think you all know it stands for National Disability Insurance Scheme, but I think it should stand for Needs a Digital Inclusion Strategy. Badly. Good evening all. I've already been introduced, so I just want to introduce Taryn, who's going to be assisting me in this presentation. Taryn, would you like to explain?
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, I made it in Word so that she could read it, and then I didn't realize you can't present in Word. Sorry.
So Taryn is going to be my screen reader tonight. Good evening. All of you gathered here today, well, first of all, just the Digital Gap Initiative. Our focus is on systemic changes, so that is legislation, standards, policies, programs, anything that you can think which comes under the umbrella of systemic change. Each one of you here tonight for this Global Accessibility Awareness Day would be aware of the barriers people with disability face to access the digital universe. Is it the cartoon app? Yeah. Okay.
So this is the cartoon. Well, this certainly buggers our plans to come to the universe.
So it's three little Daleks sitting at the bottom of a set of steps, and they're being stopped from conquering the universe by a set of steps. And often this is how I feel when you see these small little issues that are stopping me from accessing the universe. We see that the systemic change that we seek are the missing pieces in the puzzle, and our DGI logo has got a little missing piece, which also Taryn has been working to design our logo with the help of Charissa, who is also sitting in our audience today. He is a member of the Digital Gap Initiative team. What's that? Okay, yeah. So tonight I'm speaking to you as an NDIS participant, and what I see as the missed opportunities and the lack of direction to raise the bar for digital inclusion in Australia. And I just want to share some examples of these policy blind spots and also some steps that could be taken to make the scheme a vehicle for driving digital inclusion in Australia. Number one, the National Disability Inclusion Agency, the NDIA, which oversees the scheme, the NDIS, states in its policy that all documents should be accessible. That's a good policy. But in reality, when the NDIA sends you your NDIS plan, it's an inaccessible PDF.
Alert, empty document.
Thank you, Tara. Other NDIS documents are also inaccessible. So, for example, yes, Word should be accessible to us, but the NDIS has decided to present its pricing guidelines, which are important to consult for the prices that the NDIS will pay. You have it either in a PDF or in a Word document, which is 76 pages. All the information is set out in very complex tables, which are impossible to navigate with a screen reader, and the document is not searchable. So when you're trying to find if you can actually buy that assistive technology for $200 or not, you cannot. And I'm self-managing my plan, so you can see the nightmare this is causing for me. Secondly, NDIS registered providers, we're talking about the third party that were mentioned tonight, don't always have accessible websites, apps, or platforms. So, for example, I went online recently to try and find a support worker, and the platform had an image capture to complete before I can even register. And then every step of the way, you had to complete image captures. Of course, again, as an NDIS self-managed person, that means that I cannot go and find my own support worker on this type of platform. And same thing for platforms that don't allow you to have accessible tools to pay your bills, and so on. Thirdly, the NDIS lacks awareness of the digital barriers that we face in our daily activities. Now, this is all NDIS terminology: daily activities, social, civic, community, and recreational participations. So, for example, I asked an NDIA planner if I could use my support worker to assist me with my LinkedIn page and other social media platforms. And I got a flat no. Social media, everybody's on social media, so, that's not special needs. And missing the point that the only way that I can access social media is if I have an assistant to do it, because a lot of the social media platforms are not accessible. But my main goal, my main point tonight, is to talk about the what I call the Assistive Technology Assessment Guidelines of the NDIS. Those guidelines exclude products that are now called mainstream products. That's the products anybody can use. So they are excluded from the pricing, from the assistive technology that you can receive under the NDIS plans. Think about it. We say that accessibility and usability should be included in design. We say accessibility makes good business sense. And Australia recently adopted the Accessible Procurement Standard EN 301549. And no, it's not an asteroid. It's not an asteroid. It's a real standard. The companies that follow these guidelines, follow this standard, do the right thing. Have you got the do the right thing song?
Yeah, but I don't know how to play it.
Okay, we had do the right thing, It's not working.
Okay, I'll just sing the two sound captures, because the first one was, what about me?
It isn't fair. That's the companies that are being excluded from
and then we did have the Apple sound effect, because obviously that is an example of a brand that creates a lot of accessible technology but is excluded from the NDIS.
So we had Newton sitting under a tree, and the apple falls on his head, and he said, I get it, and goes, apple, whatever the apple. That was the technology, but it didn't work. Again, the companies are doing the right thing, being stopped from accessing nearly 500,000 potential customers. There are 475,000 NDIS participants, or will be when the scheme rolls out, that are being given the economic power to buy anything from kitchen appliances, home appliances, computer software and hardware, communication devices, you name it, in technology. But if that technology is now used by everybody because the company's done the right thing and they put accessibility in their products, it's no longer a special needs product. So you're not able to reach that 475,000 market. And to me, how can we promote the idea that accessibility makes good business sense if you're going to be cut off from 475,000 potential customers, by including accessibility in your product, and you're now mainstream. Now, one of the NDIS favorite example for explaining and justifying its assistive technology assessment guidelines is that they will pay for modifications to a car that a participant needs, but they will not pay for the car even if the assistant claims he needs the car for mobility. Now, that's fair enough. Now, if we say that inclusive products should be included in the assessment guidelines, does it mean that a participant can say, I need a Tesla car? Think about it. Tesla is developing a self-driven car, self-driving car. That means I could drive the car. So can I claim I want a Tesla car? Now think about it. the NDIS is all about cost-effective value for money. Now, it would reduce the need on transport payments. I wouldn't need support worker because I could just look, I'll go here, go there. And it would certainly increase my social, community and community participation, because how many of you would be my friends if I had a Tesla in the garage? And it would give us empowerment.
1 minute.
Okay, it would give us empowerment, because boom, 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 zoom, zoom, zoom. So my message tonight is that the NDIS needs a digital inclusion strategy. Now, just 1 minute. I just want to also say that when I was said no, you cannot use a support worker for your social media activities, I thought, I'm an activist for digital inclusion. I'm not going to be stopped by somebody saying no. So I went online. I found an accessible platform called Home Care Heroes. I posted a message saying, I need a social media wizard. Along came Taryn, who's been my companion for the last 3 months to help me with my support, with my social media thing. And she helped me with this presentation. So did Charissa. And without their help, I will not be breaking digital barriers. So that's why the NDIS needs a digital inclusion strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giselle. I think that gives us a great insight into the NDIS scheme and your experience with it to date. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Would you join me in thanking all of our presenters? I think they've done an absolutely awesome job. So as I mentioned before, we have our conference, Ali Camp, coming up in October. This year we're returning to Melbourne, where we sort of jump between Sydney and Melbourne each year. It's going to be on the 17th and 18th of October, 17th being our workshop day and then 18th being our conference day, where normally what we have is we have 2 streams running of presentations on that day, one which we normally have a non-tech stream and then the other that's a more technical stream. As I mentioned, we've already got some keynotes lined up. Mark Barlett from Able Gamers and also Lainey Feingold. So Lainey Feingold actually publishes or has published a book called Structured Negotiations. She's a bit of a rock star in the US. She comes to accessibility. She has a legal background, but the US, of course, is a very litigious society. She takes a different approach, which is the structured negotiation approach, where it talks about actually organizations working with individuals and improving the accessibility. And this aligns very well with how we approach accessibility here in Australia. We're not a litigious society. There's 3 cases in the history of digital accessibility that have either gone to court or nearly gone to court, i.e. Giselle and Coles. So I actually think that this is a perfect fit for Australia. And she's going to bring her expertise here for a workshop and also as a keynote presenter as well. We've actually got a few other keynotes that we're just about to lock in as well. So if you aren't following us on social media or part of our newsletter, please sign up and we will be releasing more details soon. I would like to give a final thanks again to Atlassian for this awesome venue and for being so great and supporting us. And without further ado, I think we will wrap up the night and happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day.